To introduce myself, my name is Michelle O'Neill and I work for Kinship Care Northern Ireland. I'm currently employed as an advocacy worker in the organisation. A wee bit about Kinship Care. It's the only organisation really of its kind in Northern Ireland specifically set up to support kinship carers. There's no distinction made by or between informal and formal kinship carers. We support them all. Recent statistics show, and I know this has been mentioned earlier, there's approximately 3,000 children in care in Northern Ireland, and a big thing is that now 42% of those are living with kin as opposed to the traditional foster care, so you can see a shift happening in Northern Ireland. So the Caring for Kin project is a project within Kinship Care Northern Ireland specifically set up to help those older kinship carers, great-grandparents and grandparents throughout Northern Ireland. My previous role, I was a solicitor, practiced up here in Belfast, mainly family and children's law. So I hung up my solicitor heels, as you could say, and moved to Kinship Care. I've worked there for almost 4 years now, and I must say it's the best move ever made. I work with the most amazing people, the amazing children, amazing carers. You'll hear from Rose coming up. So just to start off, I'm going to start off with some statistics. I pulled these from the Northern Ireland Census 2011. So at that time, there was 8,655 children living in households without their parent being present. There were 6,794 kinship carers caring for those children. Of those children, the largest proportion of those being cared by relatives was grandparents. 16% of those kinship carers were aged 55 to 64, and 10% were aged 65 and over. Interestingly, it pulled out 54% of the kinship carers were male and 46% were female. A quarter of kinship carers reported having day-to-day activities limited by their own long-term health problems or disabilities, and that's in addition to caring for the children. 18% of kinship carers also provided care for someone else, and almost 1/3 of households with kinship care arrangements were located in the most deprived areas in Northern Ireland. So some statistics just from the Caring for Kin project. We're quite a relatively young organisation. We started off September 2013. Throughout that time, now people think we're a massive organisation. We've actually only 6 people on the ground throughout the whole of Northern Ireland. 3 of those are based in the Western Trust, so we kind of pick up the rest of it. So just in my project, we've engaged with 338 older kinship carers and their families. 82% of those have been females and 18% have been males, so you can see it's more the females that would engage in our services. 84% of those have been aged 50 or above, and 72% are grandparents. Our helpline has handled 1,927 calls from older kinship carers. The helpline is me, so you can see I can be quite busy. We've secured almost 600,000 for kinship carers and unclaimed benefits and allowances, and we have talked today about the poverty that people are facing and living in kinship care arrangements. This is mostly for the informal carers that contact us. They're contacting us and they don't know they can claim child benefit tax credits. There's a benefit called guardian's allowance. They don't know this, so we help them access that. Also, we come across people that we think probably should have been receiving money from social services in the form of either kinship fostering allowances or residence order allowances, and that's where our advocacy services kick in to try and get them to access that money. So I'm going to go through some of the issues that we find. I'm not going to go in today about the difference between formal and informal because I could be here all day. So I'm just going to go through most of the main issues that we find that kinship carers are facing, and in particular the older kinship carers. So the first one, I know it's been talked about today already, the lack of support, information and knowledge, and this is a big thing that we see kinship carers facing every day. I have kinship carers phoning me and they're saying, I would try and say to them, so what kind of arrangement is it? Is there a legal order in place? And they would say things like, yes, I think I have a kindership order, and that doesn't even exist, so and there's people who've been through court and they have a residence order and they don't even know, that's what it's called. We've talked about before, that these placements happen out of some kind of family emergency. It could be the death of a parent abandoning a child, a parent being admitted to prison, hospital, and kinship carers are more than often contacted without any warning and basically told, unless you can take this child now, we're going to place this child into care. as we've talked about, nobody plans to become a kinship carer. Nobody puts their hands up and thinks, this is what I'm going to decide to do now. Most cases it's to provide a home for a vulnerable child that some kind of traumatic experience is happening to them, and in most cases it does result in enormous stress and upheaval in people's lives. Most kinship carers, and I know you'll hear from Rose after me, they have no experience of dealing with social services. That's something they've never come across in their life. They don't know what orders are, they don't know the legal ins and outs of things. They hear this legal jargon and they haven't a clue what people are talking about, but they just nod their head and agree because that's the way they're going to get that child. They don't know their legal rights, responsibilities, and they have no idea what helps or supports they're entitled to or what helps or supports are out there. Poverty is something we've touched on today already. Poverty and unemployment I've brought into this as well. So it's probably more particular in informal kinship care arrangements when people aren't receiving any help whatsoever from the trusts. We work with some carers who survive on their pension, and that's it. They're not claiming even the child benefit or tax credits for the child. They might be looking after the child for 4 years, but they say, oh no, if I start claiming them, their mother's going to come and take that child away from me. There's a high proportion of kinship carers that are living in poverty and very low incomes, and there was a Grandparents Plus survey, it's 2013, showed that 60% of kinship carers are in incomes below £300 a week. Many are dependent on benefits because they've had to give up work to take on care of the children, and even then more so for the older kinship carers when they get their children up, it's so difficult to re-enter that workforce when you're in your late 50s, 60s. The next one I'm going to talk about is long-term illness, and you saw from my figures earlier, almost a quarter of kinship carers have a limiting illness or disability that's going to affect their day-to-day activities. Alongside this, almost a tenth of children in kinship care have a long-term illness or disability, and this compares to just 5% of the general population. We've touched on the inadequate housing kind of issues that people deal with. I'm dealing with a case at the minute. There's 4 adults and 3 children living in a 2-bedroom property. This has happened because the grandparents took on care of their 2 grandchildren. The grandmother did work and worked full time, and that was able to pay the mortgage in her house. She had to give up her job because the children, there was additional needs and things there. She gave up her job, couldn't afford to pay her mortgage anymore, and actually had to hand her house back to the bank. Presented herself as homeless to the housing executive. She has been on a waiting list now since March. So she's moved in with her daughter who has a child, and there's an older brother living there as well. So they're sleeping in sofas. It's unbelievable the kind of situations that people are in. Multiple caring responsibilities. We've touched on this already. 18% of kinship carers are reported caring for a family member, a friend or a neighbour who has a long-term illness or disability. You'll hear from Rose. Rose has an adult son with autism. She's also caring for her elderly parents. So this is the reality for some people. Grief or loss. We have a lot of kinship carers here, they're dealing with, maybe their son or daughter has died, and that's why they have taken on care of these grandchildren. We have she's now 80 years old, grandmother in Belfast, took on care for 3 grandchildren. There was an accident, their mother was tragically killed on Christmas Day. So she herself would admit she's had those children now for 7 or 8 years. She still hasn't dealt with her own grief because she's so concerned about how the children are coping. Changes in relationship with family members and friends. When this happens, everything changes. All dynamics, all relationships change. Relationships with children's parents are often a source of this, stress and added difficulty. Some parents think that somehow these grandparents have stepped in and stole their children, and it's because of these grandparents that I don't have my child anymore. So that parent-child relationship is going to deteriorate. Some circumstances, kinship carers aren't allowed to have their son or daughter in their house anymore, and they have to say at the door, actually, sorry, you can't come in anymore. So, that's going to cause difficulties already. I was just talking to Rose about this actually on the way up in the car, the way she had to change very quickly from being a grandparent who was there at the weekends, fed the children sweets and filled them up with e-numbers and then sent them home, to this kind of new relationship where she was the mother, starting to do discipline, and so that there takes some time to get used to as well. Neglecting own self-care, this is something we find very common. Even when we're trying to arrange activities, my project is for older carers and trying to get them involved in activities and training. They're saying, if you're not anything for the children, I don't need anything, I'm fine, I just want something for the children, So we kind of try and stress, you have to look after your own self as well. Your mental health, your physical health are as much as important as the children's. Challenging emotional and behavioural difficulties. As I said, grandparents and older kinship carers who take on their grandchildren, they're basically being asked to care or become a parent for a second time. This is often much more challenging than people find it often more challenging than actually raising their own children. They're trying to help children cope with contact with their parents, difficulties at school, dealing with whatever early traumatic experience they've came through. And at the start, you'll often see children displaying this challenging behaviour when they first go to live with a kinship care, and that does settle down, as time goes on, and then they hit their teenage years, and it just all, it all opens up again. We deal with an increasing number of children at the minute with additional needs, and we're seeing this across the board. Autism, ADHD, fetal alcohol syndrome disorders becoming such a big issue. We've actually set up a support group for kinship carers with fetal alcohol syndrome disorder, and it's becoming more and more popular. So kinship carers require support to be able to deal with these conditions, know what they are, know what they mean, because when they were probably parenting for the first time, these things were unheard of and they weren't as common as they are now. Another one which I've added on, I don't have up on the slide there, it's probably quite a sad one, and it's the big worry that kinship carers have: what's going to happen when I die? And this is something we hear about. It's not nice to talk about, but it's important to kind of discuss that and have plans in place. This is something that we find children coming out in one-to-one sessions and things with children. My granny's old or my granddad's old, and I know they're going to die shortly, and what's going to happen to me? So I'll move on to the challenges we find when we're supporting kinship carers. Kinship carers, especially older kinship carers, have this kind of mindset that family issues have to be kept private, and they don't like sharing with other people really what has happened within their family. They have their own feelings of shame or guilt, shame that their own son or daughter were somehow unable to care for these children, and guilt over what traumatic experiences their grandchildren have actually went through. Many kinship carers don't ask for help simply because they don't want to appear unable to cope. They'll not reach out for fear of their grandchildren being removed. They're afraid of being told, you're too old, you've too many health issues, your home's not big enough, and as a result of this, they're not going to reach out and ask for help. As mentioned previously, most children in kinship care will have experienced some kind of traumatic event in their life, and the challenging behaviour that comes along with that. And as I said, this behaviour is different to anything else that kinship carers have ever faced. And I know we were talking about this, Rose, it's all different, and you didn't have to deal with these kind of things whenever you were parenting the first time. So the challenge we find is to try and educate kinship carers in areas such as attachment. Attachment is such a big thing, and give them practical coping strategies to be able to deal with this challenging behaviour that they're facing on a daily basis. I've put up there the lack of knowledge around technology and social media, and you'll hear from Rose, social media and Facebook and things like that terrify her. It's a minefield, and most older people, and I'm not putting everybody in a bracket here, but a lot of older people don't know anything about those. Also, you find that a lot of activities and services and organisations are now promoting themselves online and on Facebook and on Twitter, and older people don't use these as often. So if they don't know that these services are out there, how are they going to access them? I've put in there the old school way of parenting, and parenting styles have changed from 40 or 50 years ago when these people were first parenting. There was the kind of mindset, get on with it, don't talk about that, and be quiet, and respect your elders and all the rest of it. And that can be really hard to adapt to. And even the way schools teach things at the minute now is totally different. Even from when I was at school, the way they add and multiply and divide now, and my own children, I'm going, what? What's happening here? So you can imagine how difficult that is for somebody that's done this 40 or 50 years ago. Health difficulties and inability to attend activities. We've grandparents that just can't physically make it to anything. We have one, she's an amputee. We have others that are in full-time oxygen in their house. So we have to go to them, and obviously resources and things like that are limited, so that we do find that a difficulty. So I'll move on quickly, I'm aware of the time. Some of the services we provide to tackle these kind of issues. The first thing we do is provide kinship carers with information. Information and knowledge, we say, is power. We provide clarity to all these things that they're not known about. Information we provide via, we have a free phone helpline number. We can provide it over email. We also do face-to-face. We go out and do home visits, or people can drop into our offices at any time. The thing that makes us probably, the kinship carers are good at engaging with us, is we're totally independent of social services. And you go out to see some people and they're sitting really, really tense, and you would say to them, look, I am not involved with social services at all, and you just see them relax. And so to have that independent, somebody that's outside that kind of circle, we find really successful. We give them access to that financial and legal advice and assistance that maybe, and I know maybe when things are happening, they're handed a leaflet and that's what you're entitled to here, and that goes into a drawer and they don't even think about it anymore, and then they ring and say, I have no idea what's happening here. So if a kinship carer contacts us, they automatically get like a financial health check, we call it. We go through what they're receiving, what benefits they're receiving, what they're receiving from the trust, if anything. And sometimes this is then when our advocacy service kicks in, and I'm the advocacy service as well. Any issues that we see, sometimes I'm talking to kinship carers on the phone, they're maybe looking after their children 5, 6, 7, 8 years, and throughout talking to them I kind of pick up that child was lack, and maybe they've never actually received any money for caring for that child. And this is where I kick in, and I'm sure some social services offices around the country have my face and they're throwing darts at it thinking, I wish she would ever go away. But I spend every day probably torturing social services and torturing other organisations, saying this hasn't been done and why is it not been done. If I see something that's not right, I'm going to challenge it, and that's what my job is. But just a wee example of a case that we've dealt with. We had a grandfather and grandmother. They were looking after their grandson for 11 years. Same thing. It was the social services had placed him, and he rang us. They were living in a housing executive property, very, very low income, and it turned out that he should have been receiving allowances from social services all along. So it took nearly 2.5 years, but we got him awarded his backdated allowances, which was £40,000, and now he's receiving over £540 every month. So the difference that has made, and he says to me, it was never about the money, Michelle, I would have did this anyway, and I did do it for 11 years without a penny. He says, but how much easier my life would have been if I'd have had that money at that time. Another challenge, probably. No, I'll move on to something else actually. We have a connections programme. It's a new programme that we have set up, and that's a programme where it gives out small grants to kinship carers who are not receiving any money from social services. So I know somebody was talking earlier on about that early intervention and that help there that needs to be there before the assessments are carried out and things like this. So this is where our connections programme can kick in. If you're not receiving anything from social services, you're entitled to this. Money. So there's up to £1,500 available there. It can provide essential items such as your white goods, your things like that, clothes, beds, bedroom furniture, toys for the children, outside toys. So it's that's only new. So but it's been very popular so far. Another thing we do to try and tackle the isolation that kinship carers face, we hold kin together groups. We've currently 12 dotted around Northern Ireland. They run monthly in all different areas, and this is an adult-only space where kinship carers can come and meet other kinship carers and kind of share their experiences. And they're very flexible and responsive, and we kind of listen to people and see what they want to talk about and kind of gauge things from there. Kinship carers discuss things, they laugh, they socialise, kind of recharge their batteries, and some our carers have stated, this might seem a very simple activity to outsiders, but for us this is our lifeline, and this is where we kind of relax and talk to other people and get ideas as to how they're dealing with some behaviour or some challenges that they're facing. We also run a full training programme for kinship carers called Grand Families Matter. we listen to kinship carers. We focus on what we see as what their main needs are. We've did things like mood matters training, laughter yoga, Pilates. We do pamper days. We've carried out mindset training, paediatric first aid training is a big one as well. And this is all to stress the importance of kinship carers looking after their own mental and physical health. We also run training to help educate carers in areas such as attachment and how to cope with the challenging behaviours, internet safety training, etc. And coming up now, we run a free summer programme for all kinship carers, whether they're formal or informal, and that's for them, their children. If they've any other children living in the house, they're quite welcome as well, because we don't want to divide a family. So we run a free activity, a free day out every week of the summer months, and that has been really popular. We're also linked in with various food banks across Northern Ireland. This comes back to the poverty, and we're able to issue those to those who are most in need. We can collect food parcels, and we frequently deliver it to people's homes as well. So, kind of to conclude our achievements, and I want to kind of end on a high, because I think today has been quite down and quite negative on how hard things are. We have established this specialist support service for kinship carers and their children, which is now region wide. It started off in the Western Trust, and we have an excellent relationship with the Western Trust. Probably 5-6 years ago it wasn't so excellent, and we were seen as these people that are coming challenging everything. We actually held a shared ethos event a few weeks ago, and I know you were at it, and that was all about how the Western Trust, Kinship Care and Derry and Strabane City Council were working together, kind of in this same aim, that we're all together and we're all working to improve the lives of kinship carers and their children. We have secured awards in recognition of our older kinship carers and children in their care. I think our letterhead now is more awards than probably anything else. We have influence policy, and that's kind of a thing that comes from my role as well. A lot of what we've been advocating for has influenced the writing of the new Adoption and Children's Bill as well. We have improved the confidence, self-esteem and resilience of grandparents raising their grandchildren. And we have secured, that 600,000 that we have secured for kinship carers. That goes a long, long way. So just to end, kinship carers are doing a fabulous job, and I know you're going to hear from Rose now. Most amazing people, and we talk about money and poverty and things. It doesn't matter. If people weren't receiving one penny, they're still going to do it anyway. Despite all of the challenges and issues and things that we have highlighted today, they're doing it. They're doing it every day, and they're doing a brilliant job of it. And outcomes for children are better in kinship care, and just maybe with a wee bit of extra support, especially for informal carers, who knows what could happen. So, all right.